So today we're doing a story from Rabbi Nachman called The Exchanged Children. It's translated by Rabbi Avraham Greenbaum. This is a story about a certain king who had a maid in his palace who attended the queen. Obviously, a mere cook would have not been allowed into the king, but this maid was an attendant of low rank. The queen gave birth, and this maid also gave birth at the same time. Then the midwife went and switched the babies around just to see what would happen and how it would turn out. She took the king's son and put him beside the maid, and she placed the maid's son beside the queen. As time went on, these children began to grow. The king's son, the one who grew up with the king because they thought he was the king's son, was helped to rise from level to level, becoming ever greater till he was a most important personage. The maid's son, who was really the king's son, but he grew up with the maid, was raised in the servant's house. Nevertheless, the two boys learned in the same school. The king's true son, who was known as the maid's son, was naturally drawn to royal behavior, even though he grew up in the servant's house. Conversely, the maid's son, who was called the king's son, was naturally drawn to a different kind of behavior, unlike that of royalty. But having grown up in the king's palace, he was forced to conduct himself royally because that's how he was raised. Now the midwife, since women can be lightheaded, told someone the secret of how she switched the children. Every friend has a friend, and the secret passed in the usual way from one person to another until everyone was whispering about how the king's son had been exchanged. It was impossible for anyone to talk about it openly in case the king found out. It was quite impossible to let the king find out. What would he be able to do? There was no solution. It was impossible to give credence to a mere rumor. It might be false. In any case, they could switch the two sons back. How could they switch the two sons back into their proper positions? They therefore could not reveal the matter to the king, yet people continued talking about it among themselves. One day, somebody revealed the secret to the king's son, who was in reality the maid's son, telling him that people were saying he'd been exchanged. But you cannot investigate this, said the man who told him the secret. It would be beneath your dignity. You therefore cannot go into the matter at all. I'm only telling you this in case there is a conspiracy against you one day that may gain strength because of this rumor. People will say they want to take the king's son as king. The one they say is the king's true son. You'll have to think about how to deal with him and see how to remove him. Wherever the story speaks about the king's son, it refers to the one who grew up with the king and was called the king's son, even though in fact he was the maid's true son. Conversely, the one that grew up as the maid's son was really the king's true son. The king's son began making trouble for the servant, who was regarded as the father of the other son, although in fact he was his own true father. The king's son fired every kind of trouble in his direction, one after the other, in order to force him to flee together with his son. As long as the king was alive, his son did not have much power, yet he was able to cause him troubles. Eventually the king became old and died, and the king's son, who was the maid's true son, took over the kingdom. He then caused even more trouble for the servant, who was regarded as the father of the other son. He sent trouble after trouble, but craftily, so that the people would not understand that he was the one causing the trouble, since this would not look good in the eyes of the people. He therefore hid what he was doing, but caused them constant troubles. The servant realized the king was causing him troubles because of the rumors about the exchange. The servant explained the whole story to his son, who was in reality the king's true son. He told him that he greatly pitied him. However you look at it, if you're my son, I certainly have pity on you, and if you're the king's true son, you deserve even greater pity, because he wants to remove you completely, heaven forbid. For this reason, you have no option but to move from here. He felt very bad about this. However, the king was constantly shooting his evil arrows one after another, and the other son decided to move away. His father gave him a sum of money, and he left, and he felt very bad indeed about having been driven from his own country for nothing. Why do I deserve to be banished, he asked himself. If I'm the king's son, I certainly don't deserve it, and even if I'm not the king's son, I also don't deserve to have to flee for no reason. What sin did I commit? He felt very bad about it. He started drinking and visiting the brothel. He wanted to spend all the days getting drunk and following his heart's desire after having been banished for nothing. Meanwhile, the king took up the reins of power with great force. Whenever he heard the people were whispering and talking about the exchange, he took vengeance and punished them very severely, ruling with power and strength. One day, the king went on a hunting expedition with the ministers. They came to a beautiful palace with a flowing river. They stayed there to stroll and rest and stroll around. The king laid down to rest and began thinking about how he banished the other son for nothing. Whichever way you look at it, if he was really the king's son, wasn't it enough that he'd been exchanged? Why should he be banished too? And if he was not the king's son, he did not deserve to have to be banished. For what had he done wrong? The king was thinking about this and regretting his sin and the great wrong he had committed, but he had no idea what he could do about it. It was a subject he couldn't discuss or seek advice about from anyone. He became very worried and anxious and told his ministers to turn back, as he had some issues on his mind and saw no purpose in strolling around anymore. They went home, and once the king was back in his palace, much business awaited him. He became preoccupied with his affairs and forgot about the matter. Meanwhile, the banished son, who was the king's true son, continued as before and wasted his money. Once he went out alone for a stroll. He lay down to rest and began thinking about what had happened to him. What has God done to me, he wondered. If I'm really the king's son, it's certainly not fair to me, and if I'm not the king's son, I also don't deserve to be a fugitive and exile. Then he thought, on the other hand, if it's true that God could really do such a thing and exchange the king's son and make him endure all this, is what I have done right? Was it proper for me to have behaved the way I have? He began to feel very sorry and regretted the bad things he'd done. Afterwards, He returned home and went back to his drinking, but starting to feel regret, he was constantly disturbed by thoughts of regret and repentance. Once he lay down to rest. He dreamed that in a certain place there was to be a fair on a certain date. He was to go there and accept the very first paid work he was offered, even if it was beneath his dignity. When he woke up, the dream was engraved in his mind. Sometimes dreams pass straight out of the mind, but this dream and its message were strongly fixed in his mind. Even so, it was very hard for him to carry it out, and he turned to drink even more. He had the same dream again several times, and it greatly disturbed him. Once they were saying to him in the dream, "If you want to have pity on yourself, do it." And he was forced to fulfill the dream. He went and gave his remaining money to his landlord, leaving his fine clothing behind in his lodgings. All he took for himself was a simple merchant's robe, and he made his way to the place of the fair. Early next morning, he went to the fair, where he met a merchant who said to him, "Do you want a job?" "Yes," he replied. "I need someone to dry the animals," said the merchant. "Do you want me to hire you?" He needed no time to think about it because of the dream. He answered immediately, "Yes." The merchant hired him at once and immediately started giving him work to do, ordering him around the way a master orders his servants. He began wondering what he'd done. Menial work like this certainly didn't befit him. He was a gentle person, but now he would have to drive animals and be forced to go on foot side by side with the animals. But it was too late for regrets. The merchant was ordering him around like a master. "How am I supposed to go on my own with the animals?" he asked the merchant. "I also have other cattle drivers for my animals," he replied. "Go with them." The merchant gave him some animals to drive, and he took them out to the city. Gathered there with other cattle drivers who were going to take the animals, and they went together. He drove his animals while the merchant rode at the side on a horse. The merchant rode his horse cruelly and showed extra cruelty to him. He was extremely afraid of the merchant, seeing the great cruelty displayed toward him. He was afraid he'd have to give him one blow with a stick and kill him instantly, as he was so gentle and tender. He went along with the animals and the merchant at their side. They came to a certain place and took the sack containing bread for the drivers. The merchant gave them to eat, and he was also given some of this bread. Afterward, they passed a very thick forest where the trees were very close together. As they went, two of the animals entrusted to the king's true son, who had become the merchant's driver, strayed. The merchant shouted at him, and he chased after them to try to catch them, but they ran away even further, and he went chasing after them. The forest was so thick that as soon as he went in, he could not see his companions, and they couldn't see him. He chased after the animals, which ran further away. He chased them until he came into the thick depths of the forest. "Either way I'll die," he said. "If I go back with the animals, I'll die at the hands of the merchant." So great was his fear of the merchant that he was convinced he would kill him if he came back without the animals. "But if I stay here, I'll also get killed by the wild animals in the forest. Why should I go back to the merchant? How can I go back to him without the animals?" He was very frightened of him. He carried on chasing the animals, but they kept running further away. In the meantime, night fell. Never before had it happened to him that he would have to spend the night alone in such a deep, thick forest. He heard the cries and moans of the wild animals. He decided to climb a tree and spend the night there. All he could hear were the cries and roars of the wild animals. In the morning, he looked down and saw his animals standing nearby. He climbed down the tree and went to catch them, but they ran off. The further he chased them, the further they fled, until they found some grass and stood grazing. He tried to catch them, but they fled. Every time he went after them, they ran away until he came into the thickened depths of the forest. Here, where their animals have no fear of man at all, being so remote from human civilization. Once again, night fell. He heard the cries and roars of the animals and became very afraid. He noticed a very great tree standing there and saw that a man was lying there. He was afraid, but it was some consolation that he found the man there. Each asked the other, "Who are you?" "A man." "Who are you?" "A man." The man, lying by the tree, asked him, "How'd you come to be here?" He didn't want to tell him what happened, so he simply said, "Because of the animals, I was driving animals and two animals strayed here, and that's why I came here." He asked the man he found by the tree, "How did you come to be here?" "I came here because of my horse. I was riding on the horse. I stopped to rest, and the horse went off and strayed into the forest. I was chasing after it, trying to chase it, to catch it, and the horse ran further away until I came here." They decided to join up and keep together, and agreed that even when they returned to civilization, they'd remain together. They spent the night there and heard the terrible howling, moaning, and roaring of the animals. Towards morning, he heard loud laughter ringing through the whole forest. The sound of the laughter was spreading through the entire forest. The laughter was so loud that the trees were shaking and swaying with the sound. He was very shocked and frightened, but the man he found by the tree said, "This no longer frightens me at all, as I've already slept here the last few nights. The laughter is heard every night just before dawn until all the trees tremble and shake." Nevertheless, the king's true son was very shaken. He said to his friend, "Evidently, this is the place of demons, because no such laughter is ever heard in settled areas. Who's ever heard the sound of such laughter over the entire area?" Day broke soon afterwards. They looked down and saw this one's animals and the other one's horse standing there. They climbed down from the tree and started chasing after their respective animals. The cattle ran further and further away, and he chased after them, while the other pursued his horse, which ran away until the two men were far apart and lost their way. Meanwhile, he found a sack of bread. This was priceless there in the wilds. He took the sack on his shoulder and went after a while. Suddenly he encountered a man. At first he was worried, but at least it was some comfort he found a man there. How'd you get here? Asked the man. How'd you get here? He asked. Me, my fathers and fathers grew up here, but what about you? How'd you come to be here? For no human beings from civilized areas ever come here. He found this answer very disturbing because he understood this was not a human being at all, since he had told him that his father's fathers had grown up here and nobody from inhabited areas ever came here. Nevertheless, he didn't harm him, but treated him in a friendly way. The man of the forest said to the king's true son, "What are you doing here?" He replied he was chasing after the animals. "Stop chasing after your sins," he said. "They're not animals at all. It's only your sins that are leading you this way. Enough. You've already had what you deserve. You've already received your punishment. Stop chasing after them. Come with me and you will attain what befits you." He accompanied him but was afraid to talk to him or ask him any questions because someone like this might open his mouth and swallow him. Meanwhile, he found his friend who had gone chasing after his horse. The moment he saw him, he made signs as if to say, "Know that this is not a human being at all. Have nothing to do at all with him because he's not a human being at all." He went over and whispered in his ear that this was not a human being. The man with the horse looked and saw the sack of bread on his shoulder and started begging him, "My brother, haven't eaten for days. Give me bread." "Here in the wilderness, nothing will help you," replied the king's true son. "My life comes first and I need the bread for myself." But the man with the horse started begging and pleading with him, "I'll give you whatever I have. But in the wilderness, bread is worth more than any gift or bribe." "What will you give me?" replied the man with the cattle, who was the king's true son. "What can you give me in exchange for the bread in the wilderness?" "I'll give you my very self," said the man with the horse. "I'll sell you myself to you for bread." The man with the cattle considered the matter. To buy a man is worth giving him some bread. He bought him as an eternal slave. The man with the horse swore a solemn oath to him that he would be a servant forever, even when they returned to civilization. In exchange, he'd give him bread. They would eat from the sack together till the bread was finished. They went together after the man of the forest. Having been bought as a slave, the man with the horse followed the man with the cattle as they went after the man of the forest. As a result, things became a little easier for the king's true son, because if he had to lift anything or needed something done for him, he would order his slave to do it. They went together after the man of the forest until they came to a place full of snakes and scorpions. He was very afraid. Out of fear, he asked the man of the forest, "How will we get across here?" "Do you think that's hard?" asked the man of the forest. "How are you going to enter my house?" He showed them his house, which was standing in the air. "How will you get inside my house?" They went with the man of the forest, who carried them safely across and brought them inside his house. He gave them to eat and drink and left.